Hello everyone, trust you are well. In the last cycle, I called 33 of 34 Senate races correctly, and today I am going to be doing it again. And this time I'm going to be disagreeing with almost every other forecaster in the country. Before we jump into this battleground states, I want to quickly mention my website, mustycaribou.com. That's mustycaribou.com. If you're interested in following these races over the coming months, the website includes live ratings, race analysis, and a complete record of all my past forecasts. So now everything is completely transparent and accountable. So let's get into the map. Let's start by clearing away the races that I don't think are going to decide the control of the Senate. Firstly, I have the state of Colorado, the state of Delaware, the state of Illinois, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and also the state of Virginia. Alongside that, I have the state of New Jersey, despite tightening up in 2024's presidential election. And I also believe that the state of Minnesota will be safe Democratic alongside the state of New Mexico. On the safe Republican side, things are even more straightforward. I have Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, South Carolina, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho in the safe Republican category, also as West Virginia. That leaves Republicans with 46 seats in the Senate and 43 seats for Democrats, and also Oregon is safe Democrat. I have forgotten to put that one in, but there you go. So that leaves us with 10 competitive races to make up the final makeup of the United States Senate. And the first one that we're going to be looking at is the state of Iowa. Now, this state has gathered a substantial amount of attention this cycle, but that is predominantly because of its gubernatorial election. There is a very competitive race. Joni Ernst is a very unpopular governor, amongst the least popular in the Commonwealth, in the country rather, and that could see loss in the rural gains that Republicans have gained in the last 10 to 15 years. Democrats in the past have been competitive in both presidential and Senate elections, but since the emergence of President Trump, Republicans have done a lot better in the state. I struggle to see how Democrats will be able to outperform the national environment by a substantial amount and the state partisan lean. Iowa is now a safe Republican state, and for this election, its margins will probably be within that 6 to 10% range, giving it a lean projection. Next is Ohio. Now, this is a state that is drastically different from what I expect and what the consensus stands with. I believe Ohio is a likely Republican state. The reason that a lot of the analysts currently view the race as more competitive, and even Sherrod Brown, the Democrat nominee, as favorable, is the emergence of Sherrod Brown as the Democrat nominee. Sherrod Brown is a former senator of Ohio and was from 2006 to 2014. Sherrod Brown lost in 2024 in Ohio and has lost popularity since his last victory in 2018. Now, don't get me wrong, Sherrod Brown is a very strong candidate, and throughout his career, he's consistently outperformed Democrats in Ohio by focusing on organized labor and economic populism. But people are overlooking two simple realities. The first is that Sherrod Brown lost his seat, even though he ran the most well-funded campaign of anyone in the US Senate elections in 2024 and the well-managed. He also had the largest amount of credibility and still lost as an incumbent. The second is that he has lost that incumbency bias now, and that Ohio itself has continued to move to the right. What was once America's ultimate bellwether, deciding in the election in 2000 and 2004, now Republicans rather, enjoy a clear structural advantage in federal elections. And over the past few cycles, we have seen polling substantially underestimate Republicans. And in 2024, that was no exception. Even though Republicans only have a 1 or 2% lead in the polls as it stands, Ohio is a state that we see a substantial underrepresentation of Republicans in, and I believe we will see an overperformance of the polls, which will lead Republicans to win the state. So yes, Sherrod Brown could win. He does have a record of overperformance and has a way of winning back Trump voters who are former Democrats. However, I just think, in my view, he would need to significantly outperform both Ohio's recent voting history and the broader national environment, and for that reason, I do not believe Sherrod Brown will be the next senator. Now we go to the marquee race of the Senate elections in the state of Georgia. Now, this is the single most competitive race, and I'm going to leave this one as a pure toss-up. Democrat Senator Jon Ossoff is seeking a second term. His famous election against David Perdue in the 2021 runoff has been talked about since it happened as a remarkable victory for Jon Ossoff. Georgia has become one of America's true battleground states, and every statewide election is being decided by razor-thin margins. The story of Georgia politics is really, at its core, about Atlanta. Over the past decade, explosive growth across suburban counties like Cobb and Henry and Forsyth have really transformed what was a once a reliably Republican state into something more of a swing state. And although we have seen Brian Kemp dominate the state in recent years, namely in 2022 when he ran against, I think it was Stacey Abrams, and won pretty comprehensively, he's not running this time, to the disappointment of a lot of Republicans, and perhaps the president had something to do with that. And while he was considered to be the Republican Party's strongest possible candidate, he isn't going to be the nominee. Now, common convention suggests that while Jon Ossoff has a lead in the polls, Republicans are not looking too good in the state, especially seeing Georgia is a rare state where the polling doesn't necessarily overestimate Republicans at all, and the partisan bias in polling in the states is roughly zero. There is roughly very little bias between the two parties in polling. Now, the real reason I think Republicans have a secret advantage in this election is that Republicans have a huge war chest that they are yet to unlock. Now, that lies in the governor's race, where Republican nominee Rick Jackson has raised a stunning $112 million compared to just the $3 million that the Democrat governor nominee. Now, of course, that money is for the governor's race. It can't be spent on the Senate election. However, that substantial funding is going to be able to run television advertising and field offices and a volunteer recruitment, and also just one of the largest statewide turnout operations, which is imperative in Georgia to winning the state. And when a state that has the capabilities for that sort of infrastructure to decide elections, it really shows how important that funding difference is. Jon Ossoff has raised $97 million, but that is still less than the Republicans. Now, in Michigan, we have it as a lean day state at mustycaribou.com. Gary Peters is retiring, and Democrats have lost the advantage of incumbency. This is a state that Donald Trump carried, and Republicans are keen to look at taking it back to the Republican side. Now, Democrat nominee has not been decided yet. However, Abdul Said seems to be well positioned to secure the nominations. Now, I think that presents Democrats with some serious challenges. El Sayed has engaged some substantial parts of the progressive wing of the party, which is substantial in Michigan, but also the Arab wing of the demographics of the party, which is equally significant in Michigan, in particular Dearborn, Michigan, which was a place that went against Kamala Harris in 2024. Perhaps more importantly, though, there is concerns that he hasn't enjoyed the same level of support from establishment Democrats, notably Chuck Schumer, who has endorsed his opponent. This means that if those divisions continue into the general election, it is possible that Democrats could face a fundraising disadvantage and less unified campaign for Republicans. Whether the party fully comes together after the primary is something I'll look at pretty closely. However, I, at the moment, am not going to put this in the Republican column. I'll keep it as lean Democratic, but I am watching it incredibly closely. Now, we have to look at Texas. Now, for years, we've had the arguments. Texas is going blue. Hispanic trends, Californians, and it's just not happening. Republicans increasingly are demonstrating it's the opposite. Texas is actually becoming more secure for the Republicans. However, this race is substantially different now. Ken Paxton defeated John Cornyn in the Republican Party in the primary. Paxton is incredibly well known in Texas, however, not really for the right reasons. John Cornyn was a overperformer, and Ken Paxton is an underperformer. He barely won his Attorney General race and could be at risk in 2026. His nomination excites a lot of Republican voters, but it does raise an important question, which could his controversial reputation potentially push these moderate suburban voters that sort of trended to Trump a little bit in 2024 back to the back to the Democrat side. Texas itself is a state of so many different competing trends. Democrats are gaining in the highly educated suburban communities, but those trends from Dallas and Houston have been outpaced by Republicans in southern Texas and in the Rio Grande Valley. These trends were especially important in 2024, in which Donald Trump carried the state by more than he ever had. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in the lean Republican category, but Texas is certainly one to watch this time around, and James Tallarico is an incredible candidate. In North Carolina, I believe that this state could determine control of the US Senate, and I believe it is going to be a flip. Democrats are the heavy favorites here, substantially at the reason of Roy Cooper. Roy Cooper is the former governor of North Carolina, of course, and he is incredibly popular. He is running a very, very strong campaign, and it appears that nobody is particularly taking his campaign, or his opponent's campaign rather, particularly seriously in Michael Whately. And this is a real challenge for Republicans, and they need to have a change in strategy. There are two very different North Carolinas. One is the rapidly growing metropolitan areas around Charlotte and Durham, and the Research Triangle, where Democrats are continuing to grow and in support with highly educated suburban voters. The other side of North Carolina is the rural areas where Republicans are building enormous margins and are continuing to build. However, people suspect that those building of big margins in rural North Carolina are starting to run out for Republicans, and that will mean that the trends in the cities in North Carolina will start to outpace it, and Democrats will start to look at winning that state more regularly, which is a theory I subscribe to for sure, as Republicans actually underperformed in North Carolina in 2024, especially if you look at it relative to the national popular vote. In Georgia, rather in Maine, that is the most talked about race of the cycle. Graham Plattner has been the talk of the town. He has now dropped out, and Susan Collins, who has spent decades proving that she is unbeatable, is now at risk. Analysts have predicted that Collins' ticket splitting coalition is going to disappear for years now. It was meant to disappear in 2020, but she hung on in a miracle election victory. This time, she is going up a much weaker candidate in Troy Jackson. Much of the optimism around Democrats in Maine has been sucked up. Graham Plattner, whose populist campaign generated significant enthusiasm, has now been enticed to drop out, and Democrats are being forced to regroup behind a new nominee. The reason is fairly simple. Unlike many Republicans in Washington, Collins has a carefully cultivated image as an independent and moderate senator. However, this is not necessarily as true as it was in 2020. Collins has drifted to the right in her Senate voting record, and that has been reflected by a fall in popularity amongst independents. However, I think too many analysts just underestimate how strong Collins has become in Maine. Could this be the year she loses? Absolutely. But until that we see polling come in that has Troy Jackson winning against Susan Collins, I'm reluctant to call the race any other way and will put it in my lean Republican category. Finally, I want to look at the states of Florida, Alaska, and New Hampshire. Florida will go Republican, meaning Republicans will continue to control the Senate. Republicans are looking really strong in the state. I believe it'll be a likely margin, and Republicans are going to do this through sheer infrastructure. There is too many people switching to the Republican Party to lose. They clearly hold the momentum in the state and are sufficiently shifting voters. Republicans are dominating in Hispanic counties, and it is clear that Republicans have now full control of the state. With respect to the state of Alaska, Mary Patola is a formidable candidate who should not be underestimated whatsoever. Now, one reason that it is one of the most unique Senate races in this election cycle is that Alaska uses ranked choice voting, which fundamentally changes the way campaigns are fought and makes it reasonably unpredictable. Rather than simply trying to finish first, that means candidates need to also think about second and third preferences, and that's one reason why figures such as Lisa Murkowski continue to survive, because they are from the moderate side of politics, even despite facing a serious amount of opposition from within their own party. There, there is serious uncertainty over this race because of uh, the system, and alongside the candidacy of Mary Patola, who won the same race in 2022 in the House seat, but albeit the same race because Alaska at large. So I'm going to put this in the lean Republican category on the sheer basis that we don't have enough polling yet to prove that a state that Trump won by such a large margin will flip blue. However, I'm very willing to shift this into the Democrat column if more evidence entices me to do so. And lastly, we have New Hampshire. New Hampshire will go Democratic, I believe. However, it is a competitive race, and it is something worth looking at. So thank you very much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any disagreements. And make sure that you are listening to our newest videos every week. And make sure that you are following mustycaribou.com. That is mustycaribou.com for updates on the 2026 midterms. Thank you very much, and good night.